छाया आसमान देखो झूमता गगन है छाया आसमान
Welcome to BALLBUSTERS Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate. If you'd like to join the community debate, then go to nathanoakley.com and check out the Flat Earth Debate Forum. If you'd like to support this channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, and crypto link in the info box below the video. Now, on this episode of BALLBUSTERS, we will be covering the quantum eraser. I know there is a summary of the last show, as there's been a 2-week gap between this one and the last, but I'm going to introduce you to all the fellow BALLBUSTERS in the meantime. So we are joined by Quantum Eraser, Paula, Adam, and I think that's it, isn't it? Is that everybody?
No, that's me.
Oh,
Betty.
there's also Betty. My bad, Betty. Most important. Betty as well. How are you all doing,
Thank
guys?
Yeah,
All
I'm
good
okay.
here.
Excellent
Good
stuff.
evening, everyone.
Hey, Adam.
Good.
Shout out to Rob Kiln for the super chat. Thank you very much indeed. So, as I say, there has been a 2-week break between the last BALLBUSTERS because one of the BALLBUSTERS was ill last week, and the week before I had my second child, which is great news for me. And as a consequence, there might be a bit of sort of summary of the last show, which may take about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion and then get into the meat of the quantum eraser experiment. So, John, without further ado, are you ready to actually go through the summary of the last show, the wave particle duality?
Yeah. Is the screen up?
Not yet, but it will be in a moment.
Yeah, just let me know. That it's not an official summary, but I just want to put this old business to bed. And because we had, a couple weeks without a presentation, then I think people are probably going to miss out on the main point of the presentation, and they're going to go back and want to talk about photons as particles at the end of the show. I'd like to stay away from that, but that's okay. They're going to do it anyway. But let me point an exclamation point on this before we get started.
You're up. You're ready to the audience and see you.
All right. So we're talking about a physical wave versus a wave function. This is where all the confusion comes in, and it's nothing but an equivocation fallacy. I really don't think it's done on purpose, and I'm not in the business of divining people's intents from the beginning. I don't think it is, but it all really boils down to an equivocation fallacy between waves. So let's try to put this to bed. So, Professor Shankar, Chair of Physics at Yale, so we have to play this game in 2 ways. It is particles, but its future is determined by a wave. But, and that's a really big but, the wave is purely mathematical. You cannot put an instrument to measure the energy due to that wave. It's a construct we use to determine what will happen in this experiment. This is what everyone has to get through their minds. It's purely mathematical. It's not real. From the University of Tennessee, in one dimension, wave functions are often denoted by the symbol psi. They are functions of the coordinate x and the time t. But psi is not real, but a complex function. The Schrodinger equation does not have real, but complex solutions. The wave function of a particle at a particular time contains all the information that anybody at that time can have about the particle. But the wave function itself has no physical interpretation. So, I guess I'm going to have to define physical existence. This is what it is. Anything that physically exists contains at least one of these: chemical formula or structure, charge, mass, momentum, or spin, or millielectron volts, kcals, or kilojoules. That denotes physicality. So, Please provide any of these for any wave function ever devised, por favor. Are there any questions? Who still thinks probability waves, i.e. wave functions, have physical existence? Who still thinks photons, electrons, atoms, molecules are riding on physical waves like Kelly Slater at the Billabong Tahiti Pro? Okay. And this is a really good one. And is it quantum mechanics or wave mechanics? That is it digital or is it analog? I figured the name would probably give it away here, but it hasn't. All right, the second subject. Photons are particles. Richard Feynman, listen closely. The first thing, Newton believed light was corpuscular. Turned out that it had very strange properties from that point of view, and it was then explained that many of these strange properties was because, in fact, it was a wave, which was wrong. Turned out he was right. It was a particle. Do I need to read this again? I won't. Everything is really particles from the chair of physics at Yale. All things, electrons, photons, protons, neutrons, they are all particles. So let there be no doubt about that. Pretty confident here. Both Professor Shankar and Richard Feynman, right? Photons are particles. There's a live double split showing discrete chunks, i.e. quanta, that's particles, of energy and momenta hitting the photographic plate. Just go down to the description of this video and you'll see a link to the double slit experiment. It will be a live double split experiment showing photons, quanta, hitting discrete chunks of the photographic plate in that experiment. So the game's over right there. However, I feel the wave force from the Wascally Willy Wankin Wheeler wave wonkas is strong with you young Skywalkers. So let's put these on for size. So listen up. To refute photons as particles, you not only have to falsify the stamp on the forehead well-endowed demonstration and citations above, you must also falsify every single experiment with light over the past 250 years. I'll tell you what, let's hold off on this. That's too general. Let's get specific. This is what you're going to have to do. You have to debunk these experiments. You ready? The photoelectric effect. Number 2, Compton scattering. After you do that, you then have to falsify Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which states that the more you know the position of a particle, the less you know the momentum of that particle, and vice versa. Best wishes, I'll get the popcorn. You'd have better chances putting mascara on a honey badger than using the medium of the depth of the badger's incisors in your fourth point of contact to resurrect Alexander the Great's horse than refuting the case brought against you. This is the case. These three. Now, after this presentation's over, we're going to open up for questions and comments. If you are in the business of falsifying photons as particles, this is what you're going to have to do. This is the evidence against you. So what you're going to have to say is photons are not particles. And then the next words out of your mouth have to be either the photoelectric effect is falsified as evidenced by, or Compton scattering is falsified as evidenced by, or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is falsified as evidenced by. We don't want to hear any Elmer Fudd sophistry rhetoric. No stories. You have to come with cowbell. This is the evidence presented against that position. You have to falsify this evidence. Does everyone understand?
Yeah, I want to reiterate that. So the link that's available, you probably won't want to join immediately because it's going to be a while before we actually open up the lines to the public, but there is a link in the info box as per the debate, although it goes to Discord in this instance, so we have a little bit more control. However, if you are here, or if you join the show to say light is a wave, you will have to debunk that, or as John puts it, the next words out of your mouth will have to be the photoelectric effect is bunk because, and here is the evidence to back my statement, or the Compton scattering, or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So those are what you will have to present if you are to assert that light is a wave. Anything more on this preamble, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat amongst ourselves and then move on to the main event, unless there is more.
No, that's it.
Okay. Cool. So, hello again, Betty. Sorry I didn't give you a proper introduction.
Doesn't matter.
I think that's a fair summary, don't you? I think that's a fair or a reasonable expectation for someone who's going to claim that light's a wave. What do you think?
I think they will have a hard time getting the evidence. So John made a really, statement here, and good luck to anyone that wants to falsify this. So.
And to those who might say this is a simple red herring?
Well, I'll address that, Nathan, because I was wondering what's all this sandbagging about. We were just joining, but I understand the point. Look, there's a secondary and main point to be made, unless I stand to be corrected. And if you're going to red herring the secondary and main point after this, then don't use this as any points of topic to bring up, because you don't want to discuss that tonight. You can do, but if you're going to, please at least have boxes 1, 2, and 3 ticked. Is my comprehension correct?
Yes.
Fine then. I understand the purpose of the debate this evening then, and shall not red herring you as to whether or not it's a wave.
That wouldn't be a red herring anyway. Don't worry about that red herring. Whoever brought that up.
And you nearly agreed with me for 2 sentences in a row, so that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not a red herring. Whoever brought that up before, they're I don't know,
Hey,
fluoride.
Let's not pour scorn on any other ballbuster. Anyway, Paula, what's your take on all of this? I know you've made a couple of videos since the last ballbusters.
Yeah, I made the first video. Sorry about my voice. John somehow gave me his germs, and I've been sick all week. But the first video, Quantum Quagmire, was mainly my attempt to just understand the experiment, the quantum eraser experiment, and to put things in your own words is a better way of saying whether you understand something. And the second video was my attempt to say, what does it mean? First is what it is, and then what does it mean? What can be deduced from it? And I think so far, as far as just a quick point about red herrings, it depends on what the point under debate is. If it's a distraction from that point, then it's a red herring. But if it's introducing a new point that someone wants to make the main point, that is not a red herring. It's logic terminology. But anyway, the only point I would raise right now, from what you've said so far, is just that the fact that this is it's hard to get your mind around, but as far as what a wave, or what a particle is made of, is what pops into my mind. When I was first looking into these things, is okay, particles, but what is a particle? Does it have shape? Does it have size? Does it have energy, momentum? It obviously has energy and momentum. It has charge and spin. And what I think a lot of people want to do is try to visualize what that shape is. Is it a sphere? Is it a box? Is it a triangle? Like those are questions that would pop into my head. And I'm not sure they're absolutely valid questions as far as we're trying to relate this to physical objects. But it's a good question that I think a lot of people would ask. What is a particle? What is it made of?
Yeah, well, at least it is something that will hit you, basically, because it hits the backscreen of the detector, right? The catcher's mitt, basically.
Right. You can count it and make the wave function out of it and all those sorts of things. But as far as what a particle is I think a lot of where the tripping up happens between particle and wave. Because, for example, to use an analogy of water, we know that water is made of molecules. And if you separate the molecules, you no longer have water. You have hydrogen and oxygen. But when you put a bunch of water in a container, it will have wave behavior. So I don't think there's a necessary conflict between the two when it comes to properly framing the question, which is, are we talking about one bit of water, a molecule, which is not a wave, or are we talking about a whole bunch of molecules of water, which when together have wave properties? And that's the best I can do to try to pinpoint the stone that people are stumbling over.
Well, a wave is continuous. It's analog. Particles are discrete chunks, quantities, quanta. That's the difference.
Right. So I would just say when it comes to the wave particle sticking point, that we have to have context for that. And
I'm
the
giving you context.
Yeah.
I'm giving you
right,
context.
Right. So that's the only point I wanted to make, was just that it has to have context to answer the question.
Yeah, well, the wave function is not physical. The confusion's lying with wave functions and waves in people's mind. The wave function is not physical. That's what they're talking about when they're talking about waves. That's the problem.
So, yeah, wave function is not wave, and wave function is the mathematical description as opposed to something physical. So when people describe light as a wave, it's actually a reification of the mathematical description. But inside that construct, you can't take out from the mathematical describing of something a context that gives you a physical wave. It's always going to be stuff, physical stuff, quanta.
Right, but I think what people will say, what about wavelength of light? What about, all the frequency of things that are appearing to be a wave? Not talking about the probability distribution, the wave function concept, but instruments that measure frequencies, or the splitting of sunlight through a prism. That's what I would think would be questions in people's minds.
I already went over that in the last presentation with diffraction grading. I spent 20 minutes on it.
Right. I'm just saying, if people are just coming to this topic, these are steps, because when I did those videos, I tried to write down the steps I went through trying to reason it out. So what I was just saying is these are steps people are going to take to that. So
sure. The bit that John's
all I have
referring
right now,
to is the divisible grades that you can see, and he had them up in little dots, getting ever more fractal as you increase the number of slits. That's the bit you're referring to, right, John?
Yeah, we went over diffraction grading and how wavelength and frequency was contrived from that.
Sure. So it comes from the maths. Anyway, at this point, because this is going to be a discussion that opens up again, undoubtedly, although it's not the purpose of this show, when we open up the lines to the public, although we've already laid down the ground rules in that regard. Is there anybody else on the panel that wants to add anything to this before we actually move on to the quantum eraser experiment? I'll take that as a no. Okie doke. Right, so let's just bring up my window. Bear with me 1 second.
So back to the double slit experiment results. So what is going on here, right? What are these results telling you? The difference between these results. Now, we already talked about the particles are hitting this. That's not the issue. We're looking at the overall pattern. So what is this telling you? Well, it's telling you, let's go with the interference pattern first. It's telling you that if there was no detector here, that the photons were acting like, very important, like waves, non-physical waves. That if there was no detector here, you wouldn't get anything here. Nothing's existing here. As opposed to this pattern, we have the knowledge of the which path information. Well, what's this pattern telling us? Well, that the photons acted like, baseballs before the double slit, through the double slit, past the double slit, and hit the detector. They did exist. It's like taking baseballs, chalking up baseballs, get a big double slit and fire 500,000 baseballs through back to the backstop, a black backstop. This is what you're going to get. I mean, a lot of people, when they look at these, they don't see, the ramifications, but that's what it means. And again, it's the overall pattern that's the issue here. Not that particles are hitting here. Everyone knows that they're particles hitting. The problem, if they're Newtonian particles, and every particle is a Newtonian particle, we should only see no interference. We should only see this. But we see interference to the right. Well, that's a problem. Right? What are they when we're not looking? Or better said, knowing. That's the key. And why is it when we look or measure or to know where they are before they reach their destination, that's the photographic plate or the emulsion plate, the pattern changes and we get a standard particle pattern here to the left? Why is that? So again, this is the typical double slit over on the right-hand side. Young's typical double slit experiment. There are no slit detectors in this experiment. It's just virgin. He's going to fire a coherent light source, and he's going to get an interference pattern on this back wall. But, after those experiments by Einstein and Compton and a few others, they said, well, wait a second. Photons are particles. Why are we getting this interference pattern back here? We shouldn't be getting that. Now I'm going to skip a lot of experiments, a lot of time here, but eventually they said, okay, there's something going on at these slits. Let's figure this out. So they put photon detectors here, right? Gathering the which path information. They were storing the information. And what happened? Excuse me. Well, the wave function collapsed. That's what they say. That's how they phrase what happened, the difference between the interference pattern and the two columns. The wave function collapsed, right? And they're saying, well, wait a second. I mean, we just put photon detectors here. Why is it changing the overall pattern? It doesn't make any sense. But it's really cool because there are only two choices left here. Why this wave function is collapsing, right? One's obvious, one's not so obvious. But the first one is, well, the photon detectors are somehow or in some way interacting with these photons coming through this through these slits and changing this pattern, right? Or number two, it's not so obvious. It's the path information. It's information. It's knowledge. It's knowing that's collapsing this pattern. So that's pretty cool. There's only two choices. We're looking at only two choices and a cause and effect relationship, right? Well, that's pretty easy now. We can test this. We got this down. We can deal with this. So you had two camps. Either the photon detectors are causing wave function collapse, or knowledge of the which path information is causing wave function collapse. The only two choices. It's black or white. It's a 1 or a 0. No interpretations here. It's either this or that.
Okay, we'll take a short break, so hopefully we can get some opinions from the panel. So maybe Betty, if you want to go first again.
Now, can I start off?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Please, can you pull that back up on the screen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a microcosm of a bigger picture. When we talk about the two ontological primitives, that is, there's only two choices for how we, the universe and us, are here. It's either nature or intelligent agency based on information. Now, if you take a look at these two camps right here, it's a microcosm of that, right? You see the two ontological primitives. Number one is nature, because it's physical detectors causing wave function collapse or decoherence. And number two, it's the information that's causing wave function collapse. So right here is a microcosm of a bigger picture that we want to answer. The two ontological primitives, which one is it? It's either a 1 or 0. It's either black or white. It's either yes or no. That's it. Thanks.
Betty?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing for me as well. I mean, that double slit says it basically. For me, that it's either the one or the other, and it's I don't have anything to add on that. So for me, it's clear. John explained it very well.
Paula?
I would just say that having looked into it, because it's always good to look up things ourselves as well, that it seems pretty obvious that nobody's trying to fool anybody. This is not a magic trick. It's not some grand plot to fool people into something, because they didn't get the results they expected a lot of times. And there was a lot of back and forth. If you follow the history of the experiment and quantum physics and all those things, there was a lot of argumentation among them. And so the winning thing, although that does happen in science, quote unquote, where there's ego and reputations and corruption involved, it doesn't seem to be the case here. It's just a mind-bending thing, even to physicists. And so I don't think they're trying to fool anybody. I would just wanted to make that point.
Sure. It's scientific, as they say. What about you, Adam? You got anything to add?
Nothing significant, really. I mean, I wouldn't try and force a number 3 in any way, if you know what I mean. But the only thing I would say is that's point 1 is quite comprehensible, understandable. We can, even if we don't understand it exactly why it's happening, we can conceptualize what point 1 would be. Number 2, I suppose, is the secret, and it's trying to wrap your head around what the reality of knowledge of the path is, outside of it being recorded somewhere, how that thing is. We've just been talking in terms of photons being physical things, how that is interacting with reality. So yeah, I agree with the point, but still, it does your head in, doesn't it, quantum mechanics?
Well, hopefully not. We'll bring some clarity. Paula, is there any chance you can remind the audience what the ontological primitives actually are?
Sorry, I was muted. Ontological primitives. Well, I always try to put things in without using the terminology, so because people just gloss over. But we're basically talking about how you know what you know, right? I think not having a fog brain today, because that's been a thing all week. But how you know anything, well, this gets complicated. But the thing is that truth or fact or something existing is independent of who believes it, which is a highly contested idea among a lot of people that think that no, there's no such things as absolutes, that it's all solipsism. Basically, it's what you perceive. But I think that this principle holds, if I'm recalling the right terminology myself, is that there is reality or truth or fact independent of whether anybody perceives it or not, but that knowledge of something should be based upon things that you can observe or put the scientific method on in certain cases, or that everyone can verify, that can be verified in some way. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but it's kind of what I would start with, I think.
Yeah, but there are just two choices, right? Either nature did it or intelligent design.
I guess I went off a little philosophical on that. I'm sorry.
No, that doesn't matter. No, yeah, but I think that there's no third choice. That's basically it. I mean, you can say that aliens did it, but then still, who created the aliens? And then you get into the sort of a regress fallacy, infinite regress fallacy. So there has to be an initial cause, and that cause must be outside of the narrative that we are in, where we find ourselves in, the reality that we ourselves are in. And I think that the whole thing with the quantum eraser experiment makes that more clear. And I think that we will go through that next.
Sure, that's going to be coming up and coming. But if you can just, Betty, if you can summarise the two ontological primitives, as there is only two.
Yeah, well, either nature did it, so nature had to wiggle itself together and make cells, and via evolution, whatever that is, as John would say, come, and then finally we get people, and we think about ourselves in that fashion. Or there is a designer, a god, and for me that's even a personal god, created us, because he is outside time and space, and he is the one that is outside of the computer game, so to speak, and made up the laws, the rules, and how we can develop, and what our five senses are. And for us to figure out what God is more difficult, I think, because we have to think within the narrative that we are being designed in, and so we will never comprehend what God is in its entirety. But we get a grasp of who He is by the design, by things in nature that we see, and in structures, and how things are organized and stuff. So for me, there's enough things that point to intelligent design. And I think that if we put together a lot of the stuff that we are made of as people, and put it together and wait a couple of years or thousands of years, I don't think that there will be arising a person or people from that. So because you have to have intent and you have to have information, and information isn't something physical. That's not of nature itself. It's in nature, but it's not of nature. That's my take on it.
Okay. But because this was supposed to be a hint at them, and John's probably chewing his thumbs off at the minute, but so I'll just summarise and then we'll carry on a bit further on. But yeah, so just to summarise, so it's either everything created from nothing, or everything from a creator, or from creation, an overriding force that creates, rather than everything spontaneously coming into existence from nothing. The point being that you have a narrative with a creator external, or a big bang in the current narrative, everything coming out of nothing. So with that, we'll carry on.
So, before I get to this key point, this is a really good point right here. Let's go back up here, because there's a lot of confusion out there. We don't want to add confusion. We want to take away confusion. So when people get in these discussions, what happens here is they don't differentiate and provide a distinction between photon detectors or electron detectors or whatever detectors at the double slit and this plate back here, this photographic plate. This is what I call a catcher's mitt, right? That's how I differentiate them, because all it's doing is catching these photons or whatever is being fired through the double slit. So be careful when you're in these discussions. Go ahead and delineate what you're talking about, right? Because there's so much confusion with detectors this, detectors that. I was in a few discussions. I just dropped the discussion. I said, we're so far off the main point, there's no sense in going on. So go ahead and do that. It'll limit confusion. So back to our two questions, right? Well, the quantum eraser experiments and more of the delayed choice experiments were designed to settle the question on the mechanism for the wave function collapse, mainly the quantum eraser part of the experiment. Most of these experiments were thought experiments. They were the brainchild of Professor John Wheeler at Princeton. He thought up all these experiments, but back in the day, they didn't have the technology to deal with them, right? They couldn't actualize them. However, as we're going in time, 70s, 80s, and 90s came along, they said, well, hey, we can actually actualize these thought experiments. And they did. Good news for us. So that brings us to a delayed choice quantum eraser, right? I call this the undisputed. It's undisputed on many levels, and my namesake. And this was by Marlon Scully and Yunhoo Kim in 1999. And the reason why I call this the undisputed is that any conjurings that anyone feebly dreams up to obfuscate quantum mechanics is clobbered incessantly over the head with this experiment alone. I mean, there's not an argument, there's not a single one in 10 years that I just didn't go into this quantum eraser and just pummel anyone's arguments. That's why it's undisputed, or one of the reasons why. The second one is the simple elegance of this experimental design. You're going to see it here in a few minutes. It is quite noteworthy. I've seen thousands of experiments, and this one just stood out to me. You know, over many different disciplines, this one really stands out. It's simple elegance that stands out. And number three, the magnitude of the downstream ramifications of what this means for our reality will leave you breathless. I mean, it's quite amazing, and you're going to see that here in a few minutes, hopefully, where you don't have a pulse. So ever since this experiment, this is another funny thing, ever since this experiment was published and continuing to this day, has sent and continues to send physicists in droves to the Eastern mystery religions, right? Why? Well, there's no way out. I mean, if you're an atheistic scientist and you understand quantum mechanics or have been around the discipline, you can't reconcile it with your worldview. So it sends them in droves. You can even go through the literature and find them talking about this, right? They won't go to Christianity. We can't have any of that. So we have back to our cause and effect relationship. We have two choices. Well, if we have a cause and effect relationship and we only have two choices, what can we do? I know, excuse me, I almost choked. I know, let's do the scientific method. Pollen's not helping here either, man. We got like a 1/4 inch of pollen outside on my Jeep. So it's pretty bad. But listen, we can do the scientific method, right? Let's do an experiment. So observe a phenomenon. Photons, elementary particles, atoms, molecules exhibit both wave-like, that's interference patterns, or particle behavior, no interference pattern. Step 2, the alternative hypothesis. If the which path information is known or can be known, then we will observe wave function collapse. That's no interference. Conversely, the null hypothesis. If the which path information is known or can be known, then we will not observe wave function collapse. In other words, if the which path information is not known or it's erased and never can be known, then we will observe interference. That means the wave function's intact. Now, if the environment is the mechanism for wave function collapse, they call it decoherence. That's interaction quanta with a physical measuring device, in this case slit detectors, then we will not observe any change in pattern between the downstream detectors. I'll show you those here in a few minutes. The independent variable in this experiment is inside the experimental setup. It's based on the paths. It's either the known paths, and that's detectors D3 and D4, and the unknown paths, detectors D1 and D2. The dependent variable is, well, whether we're getting interference patterns or no interference patterns. Just that simple. Excuse me. So, test experiment. Remember the two camps now. Don't lose sight of this. Don't forget the question. The two camps for the cause of wave function collapse, it's either the slit detectors or knowledge of the which path information. Now, this is the experiment. This is kind of small. Let's go to a bigger version so you can see it. Now, at first blush, this is pretty complex, right? It's pretty intimidating. But if you take your time, get the Adderall drip out, right, and go through this experiment, identify all the players and what's going on here, like 5, 10, 20, or 500 times, you'll get this. It's actually, after you get it, it's really quite simple. And like I said, simple elegance. Let's go through it. We'll go through it slow. So we got the laser beam, the light source back here. It's an argon pump laser. You have the double slit right here. You have a BBO crystal and a Glan-Thompson prism, right? Now, before we move on, notice something I didn't mention over here, right? What didn't I mention over here by the double slit? There are no slit detectors here, right? So we're testing this hypothesis directly. There are no slit detectors in this experiment. Okay? So let's move on out. D0, D1, D2, D3, and D4, along with D0. All these guys, all these black rectangles here, are catcher's mitts. They're only catching these photons. That's all they're doing. You got another prism here that's guiding these photons on their paths. These green things right here are beam splitters. Now, they're half silvered mirrors. That is to say that any photon incident on one of these beam splitters, there's a 50-50 chance of the photon either transmitting through or reflecting off. Okay? MB and MA are full silver mirrors. They can only reflect 100% of the time any photon that's incident onto them. And you have the coincidence counter, right? This is storing all the information from this experiment. Another important thing, this is a fire and forget experiment. That is to say, you can turn this experiment on, leave the lab, go on vacation, and you're good to go. There are no observers in this experiment. Very important, right? No observers. You don't have to observe anything for this experiment to come to fruition. Okay? So let's go through a path. So we have the argon pump laser here. It fires a single photon at a time through the double slit. Hits this BBO crystal. Now it converts that single photon into two entangled photons. The signal and the idler, they're sister photons. This Gland-Thompson prism separates those entangled photons and sets them on two different paths. One to D0 and the rest through this part of the experiment. Now, we're not going to pay any attention to D0 for right now. Let's just be concerned with what's going on down here. So, a photon is fired, and D4 gets a ding. It gets hit. So, but what can we say happens if D4 gets hit? Well, what we can say is we know the path information, right? It can only come out of the A path or the red path. We'll call the red path A path. There's no way a photon can be fired out of the B path or the blue path and hit D4. So we know the path information. The same thing happens with D3. Due to the experimental setup, if this detector is hit, the only way it can be hit is if it came out of B. There's no way a photon fired out of slit A can hit D3. The same, there's no way that a photon fired out of slit B can hit D4. There's just no way. The experimental setup limits that, right? So now we move on to D1 and D2. This is the eraser part of this experiment, D1 and D2. Or better said, it's the obfuscation part. Excuse me. What's happening here, the path of these photons are taking is erased or obfuscated by the experimental setup, right? As for D4 and D3, it can take the photon can take only one single path, but with D1 and D2, it can take both paths. Watch. A photon fired out of slit A can transmit through BSB, reflect off MB, reflect off BSC, and hit D2, right? A photon can also be fired out of slit B path, transmit through BSA, reflect off MA, transmit through BSC, and hit D2, right? So the path is obfuscated. It can come out of either slit. We don't know. We can never know. Every single time a photon hits D2 or D1, guess what happens? We get an interference pattern here. It's acting as if, very important part, as if, because we don't know the path information, it's giving us an interference pattern here. Guess what happens at D4 and D3? We get wave function collapse every single time either one of these detectors are hit, right? This is over. It's over. Our question's over right here. There are no slit detectors. The wave function collapses because knowledge of the which path information, right? Yeah, but we're not done yet. That's pretty cool, but that's not the jaw-dropping part just yet. Let's go back to D0. So, photon gets fired, split into two entangled photons. The sister photons, one sister goes here, the signal photon. The other sister photon, the idler, goes on its path. Well, this detector is hit 8 nanoseconds before any of these detectors are hit in this experiment. In fact, this detector is hit by one of the sister photons before its sister reaches these beam splitters. It's right in this area or right in here. Guess what happens? Every time D0 displays a wave function collapse or no interference pattern, its sister hits D4 or D3. Every single time, there's no exception. Every single time D0 registers an interference pattern, its sister photon hits D2 or D1. We're off the reservation here. You know, if your jaw didn't hit the floor just now, you need to check your pulse, because we're off the reservation. This photon knew where its sister was going before it got there. Right? Now, either this photon got a highly complex computer on board, or Edgar Casey or Gene Dixon are riding this photon, then we're off the edge of the map. I mean, take your time and savor this. Right? Let's go back to the experiment, right? And deal with the experimental results and leave you with that. Well, this is easy, right? The results of this experiment are easy. The unknown paths, we got interference patterns. The known paths, we didn't get interference pattern. If we had a wave function collapse, it's over, right? Right? The slit detectors versus knowledge of the witch path information, it's over. It's knowledge of the witch path information. Done. End of story. Analyze the results. Well, we just did. Let's go through it formally. As you can see with the results above, the witch path information coming from either slit A or slit B was erased, obfuscated, or lost by the experimental setup for R1 or R2. Don't let this confuse you. It's D0 and D1 with D0 or D1 and D2. So D0 in combination with D1 and D2. So the photon acted in a way as if it went through both slits. It displayed an interference pattern, and it's the same pattern as a traditional double slit experiment without slit detectors. For R3 and R4, the witch path information was known due to the experimental setup. It displayed no interference, the same pattern as the traditional double slit experiment with slit detectors. Since there weren't any slit detectors in this experiment, that is, the slit A or slit B path information was either known or unknown merely by the experimental setup for each of the downstream detectors. Well, this is easy right now. Step 5, validate or invalidate the prediction, right? Well, the alternative hypothesis is validated. There is no possibility that the slit detectors collapsed the wave function. Why? Well, because there weren't any. Therefore, the prediction is confirmed. Knowledge of the witch path information solely collapses the wave function. The null hypothesis is rejected or falsified. Decoherence is incoherence. It's over. So, the experimental conclusions. The existence of the witch path information alone causes wave function collapse. Decoherence, physical interaction with the measuring devices, does not cause wave function collapse. And quantum mechanical phenomena transcend time and space. That is, space-time is bunk. That's why Einstein tried to debunk quantum mechanics, because it was debunking him. He was the antagonist. We needed him, right? He was the canvas used to paint this picture, right? Sorry about that, but he got debunked. Well, additional confirmation. I picked 3 out here. I can, pick hundreds now. But the one that stands out is this one, Zhao Song Ma, from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013. The quantum erasure with the causally disconnected choice. This experiment not only confirms and validates the delayed choice quantum erasure, but validates the time component by 5 orders of magnitude and the space component by 50 orders of magnitude. Their detectors were like 144 or 45 kilometers apart. Like, this is over.
Okay.
That'll just about do it. Well, there's still some extra kindling we're going to burn here, but that's it. It answered the hypothesis. It answered the question. Not only that, not only delayed choice quantum eraser, but now there's thousands of them.
The thing is, you say a lot of it's over in the presentation. Can you elaborate on that, John?
Yeah,
What is
the
over
question
exactly?
Yeah, the question's over. The question was either the detectors, the physical detectors were causing wave function collapse, or number two, it was the knowledge or the witch path, the existence of the witch path information. So it's the witch path information existing causing wave function collapse. That answers the question, the ontological primitives. It's over.
Okay. And some people in the chat, I saw that they laughed a little bit about the sister photon. Can you explain what that means? Entangled photons and
Yeah, two entangled photons were generated and sent on their separate paths.
how they do that with that prism? I think.
Yes, it's called
Par-
spontaneous parametric down conversion. We don't want to get into that right now. If
Mhm.
they want background information on all that, then maybe I could send it over chat. I could probably put it in Discord also, but we don't want to get bogged down into technicalities. That will be here all day.
That's fine. Just describe it slowly. Say the words again. Subparametric down conversion is what I heard.
Yeah. Yeah, in this specific experiment, it's spontaneous parametric down conversion, SPDC.
Cool. So I would like you to reiterate. So how does this answer the ontological primitive? So we have everything coming from nothing, or everything coming from a creator, and we have the delayed choice quantum eraser giving you the answer to the answer being the independent variable being knowledge of the witch path. So the existence of the witch path information being able to be discovered or capable of being examined is the cause of the wave function collapse. So if you have knowledge of the witch path, how does that answer the ontological primitives?
Well, you can't have information without a knower, right? Only intelligent agents can create information. So it's a feedback loop. And we only had two choices, right? Either the physical detectors were causing wave function collapse. Well, it didn't cause wave function collapse. Why? Well, there were no physical detectors or slit detectors in this experiment. So it eliminated that choice right off the bat. So, like I said, it's either black or white, 1 or 0, yes or no. And the choice was confirmed, the second one.
Okay, so you also have, I forget which detector it is, the one that's milliseconds prior to actually getting split. So before you have the actual choice being made, in essence, so before you've got either 2 lines or multiple lines, if you want to keep it simple for those in the audience, before that choice is made, the sister is hitting a detector and in essence telling you in advance whether you'll get wave function collapse. So without stealing any thunder, what's the significance of that? You said we're off the reservation.
We're going to talk about that here over the next few minutes because that was the second part of the experiment. That part of the experiment wasn't involved with our initial question, our main question.
Sure.
But we're going to get into that here in the next few minutes.
Sure. So, well, I'll bring it back on track. So I'll summarise. So the important point of this is to say that you've established the cause. The independent variable has been verified within the setup, and it's a direct testing of the hypothesis, as John said, because there is no slit detectors. So therefore, you are directly testing the hypothesis and confirming it as knowledge of the witch path, or the existence of the witch path information in the first instance, just to be a bit more clear. So Adam, have you got anything else you want to add? And then Paula, and then we'll move on if not.
No, I mean, that's pretty standard. The only bit I don't really have question with is necessarily the full supposition of a creator. For me, it certainly proves that the system in which we're operating has been programmed, is the definitive statement, conclusion I'd reach. I wouldn't necessarily go quite as far as to, it implies a creator of the system, but that system as, and I think that the last bit, which is the Einsteinian debunking of space-time, it does. The other nice bit for me is that it destroys that's an operating system, because this system seems to operate outside of any alleged fabric being interwoven with time.
That's cool, because I 100% agree with your sentiment, which is to say, when you have this anthropomorphization of a creator, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, I kind of don't, that doesn't sit well with me. But as you phrased it, there is a program that we're working within, and therefore it must be programmed. That much we can, or that much, I'll speak only for myself. I know other panel members feel differently, but that's certainly, you know, a given at this point, as far as I am concerned, and it seems that you are in agreement with me on that particular point, Adam. But I won't ask for anything more from you, Paula, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I would just, two things. One is that people are trying to compare the quantum eraser experiment to the Cavendish experiment, and there's really no comparison at all. There was no really rigorous controls or anything. There could be vibrations affecting, the apparatus. It was, he made observations, but one person did this, and they say it's been replicated, but the point is that he wasn't even looking for gravity. He was looking for mass. And the conclusion was the measurement, so-called, was such a small, tiny, tiny number that the margin of error would wipe that out anyway. And the fact remains that this quantum eraser experiment is bending over backwards to eliminate any other possibilities. That's why it's designed. The other point being, there was a book called In the Beginning Was Information by Werner Gitt, and basically, I think I never read the whole thing, and it was out a long time ago, but I think the gist of it was this very point, whether it was based on this experiment or not. The point is that the universe screams design from every bit of it. The laws of nature, I've often asked people which came first, the laws of physics or the matter they act upon, because it's a both and. You have to have both. Nature won't do anything unless it has laws that it follows. And those laws come from an intelligence, because there's transmitters and receivers. There's something that must do something and something else that must receive something. And so design is inherent in everything in the physical realm. And so even without this experiment, we could still reach that same conclusion, which has basically been the creation evolution debate all these years, was that we see design, such as flowers and bees, interdependence that can get so complex. And the more we study biology at the micro level, the more obvious it is that systems are irreducible in their complexity, that you can't just go from gills to cardiovascular, for example. These things have to have evolved perfectly in tandem for a bazillion years, which is preposterous even by evolutionary standards. And so, all things considered, that this experiment only serves to confirm in a very rigorous way that design is obvious and there must be a designer.
Yeah, there's a nice quote. I can never remember who it's by, and I'm going to butcher it slightly. The first sip of the scientific cup will make you an atheist, but at the bottom, God is waiting for you. I've done a terrible job of paraphrasing that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Shall we move on, or is there anything else anybody wants to add before we move on to the last part of this presentation?
I just want to ask, she mentioned evolution. What's that?
I was hoping you wouldn't do that, but yeah, I picked up on that too. I think I think it was in context when you said evolve, you were actually saying how preposterous that idea was, were you not, Paula?
Right, exactly. It's the same proposition that nature by itself does things without a designer, when that's utterly impossible. No matter how many years you give something, time itself is waved like a magic wand that anything is possible. And even though they can't replicate it, they believe it. It's just a belief when it comes down to it. And that's
Also-
why you were saying that thing about the theologian. The illustration I heard was that the scientists are climbing this huge mountain, and at the top they find a band of theologians who have been there for centuries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it starts with quantum mechanics puts the exclamation point on it, because actually, I love, the biochemistry part. That's my first love. But quantum mechanics, see, in biochemistry, you have to have chemicals. But you see, what quantum mechanics is saying, you can't even have that without information. In other words, get your own dirt.
Yep, that's that joke that is all been around for a long time. That the scientists are telling God, "You can go. We can do this ourselves." And then God says, "Well, let's have a contest. You make man, and I make man." And he said, "You can start." And then the scientists pick up some dirt and try to make man. And then God says, "Hey, what's that? Get your own dirt." So that's what it's coming from. And if you only have to tell this joke, and people laugh at it and laugh for it, but it is basically what it comes down to.
It's basically what we're talking about here right now.
Yeah,
In fact, it's the whole point.
yeah. Just
Yeah.
a little joke can get you there too. So
See, the gobsmacking implication here are that not only are there no slit detectors at the double slit, but again, time and space or space-time is utterly meaningless in this reality. And how in the world did the sister signal photon know where its sister idler photon was going before it got there? How did that happen? Interdimensional Jedi telepathy? And number two, how in the world can photons know the which path information? Aren't photons inanimate objects? I mean, they're not sentient, intelligent beings, are they? And why act differently even if they did know? I mean, this is preposterous anyway. They don't know anyway. So somehow the photon knew that you knew where it came from and where it was going to end up before it ended up, and changed its behavior accordingly. What's that sound like? Right? Sounds a whole heck of a lot like omniscience, doesn't it? It's just jaw-dropping. It's unbelievable. See, these guys knew this stuff even before these experiments came out. These guys knew it. Check us out, 1986, from Professor John Wheeler. Right? It begins to look as we ourselves, by our last-minute decision, have an influence on what a photon will do when it has already accomplished most of its doing. We have to say that we ourselves have an undeniable part in what we have always called the past. The past is not really the past until it has been registered. Or to put it another way, the past has no meaning or existence unless it exists as a record in the present. That's why Niels Bohr said, no phenomenon is a phenomenon unless it is an observed phenomenon. Sound familiar? First step of the scientific method. Let's take a little sidebar here. That means all the fairy tale just so story prognostications, for example, radiometric dating, or any dating method for that matter, by the metaphysical pseudoscience priests telling us what happened in the past. Remember these guys, these clowns, right? We talked about before. These claims are all cod-swallow horsepucky, validated by experiment. You can't get around this. Again, in 1986, Sir Rudolf Peierls. The moment at which you can throw away one possibility and keep only the other is when you finally become conscious of the fact that the experiment has given one result. You see, the quantum mechanical description is in terms of knowledge, and knowledge requires somebody who knows. You gotta have it. We live in a virtual construct. I don't want to hear it. From the snowflakes out there. This is what these experiments are telling us. Unless you can show photons and electrons, having sentience and intelligence, I'm sorry. There you are. There it is. Who's the programmer? You got to have one. Who's the knower? You got to have one, right?
Okay, we'll pause it there. We'll start
Yep.
with you, Adam, if you're paying attention. You there, Adam? Hopefully so.
Yeah, I'd again, I go back to my other point. I probably it applies the same. Yeah, I don't disagree with what John's saying. It's the conclusions are obvious, really.
Fair enough. Paula?
I would agree with that, obviously. No surprise. And the question is raised in the chat, well, how do we know there's only one creator? And to that, I would just give Occam's razor is unless you have a reason to multiply creators and you have some evidence that there are more than one, then I don't see the reason to even ask the question. But the point is that if nature shows us that all the laws work together, and for example, that all life has genetic material that follows basically the same rules, then that points to a single entity, as far as I'm concerned. I can't rule out multiple creators, but I think the burden of proof is more on the multiple creator idea than there is on the single creator.
I answered that question in a creator versus atheism. It's the last section, so they can scroll down, go to the description of this video, scroll down, creator versus atheism, and then fast forward to the last subject, and that it'll answer your question.
I mean, Nathan,
Yes.
if we're going to get a bit like Boys from the Dwarf, would be my only retort, if you know what I mean, where you would start to not necessarily look at multiple creators, but look at multiple different rules in additional dimensions that sit above this. But again, that's kind of getting into, I'd say, a bit of Boys from the Dwarf sort of complete theological presupposition. But
Well, it's
in
not.
terms
It's,
of
it's
the,
not. It's Einsteinian again. Well, when you say Boys
Yeah,
from the
it's-
Dwarf, do you mean Red Dwarf?
yeah, exactly.
You know where they got
It's
all the
kind of-
ideas from Red Dwarf from?
Yeah.
Where?
Well, well, standard sci-fi, which comes from, I suppose, Einsteinian laws, a lot of it. But
No, Rob Naylor read A Brief History of Time.
did he? Oh,
Yeah.
right. So,
It's
Okay.
all Einsteinian, the whole lot. So when
yeah.
you talk about parallel dimensions, you're talking Einstein.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
No, so what I'm alluding to there is not parallel dimensions. I'm talking what John says is logical, sensible. You will still get some apologetic that you can have higher dimensions, just like Einstein is trying to interweave time into the fabric of the universe. You could have the 21s that are in string theory, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Other stuff that doesn't necessarily make the only conclusions you can reach with the physical universe, which is the only evidence we have, which is what John's outlined, true. Does that make sense in terms of a continued kind of theoretical physics kind
Not
of
really.
stuff?
You're way
Still
off
doesn't explain this world, this reality, does it?
Yeah.
No, exactly. I'm not. That's what I'm saying. The only apologetics would be that kind of totally theoretical physics supposition where you have additional dimensions that allow different laws that sit outside
I mean,
of the
to that,
laws.
what I would reply,
quite
Adam,
like.
in an almost sarcastic way, is anything's possible. However,
Yeah.
in this instance, we're focused on existence through information. So this is predominantly focusing on the stuff that we can prove within our dimension, if you like. So yeah, anything's possible. But what we know here and now from this is that you've got to have a knower in the first instance.
I think that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
But that's it. You can go as far off the reservation from that, and from medicine how far off the reservation you can go from a single scientific experiment. You can go way off, right? Whereas this is quite specific.
And that genuinely was why my first comment was yes, correct, agree. Because like I said, the only place you can go is into supposition to outrule the logical conclusions from what John went through.
This conversation breaks my heart, Adam, because what you're talking about is stuff that I held very dear back when I was a globehead, and these concepts are fantastic in my opinion. They're just awesome. They're bollocks though.
I would just like to add that the thing is about moving the goalpost, basically to invoke all these other possible dimensions and universes. It doesn't answer anything any more than eternal regression answers anything. It's evading the question, actually.
I agree.
To places
almost
where
got
they
there,
can't
Paula.
be.
I nearly charged him with that, but he didn't quite get there. He was very careful.
Right. But yeah, it moves things to a place and time that no one can observe, and tries to use that for an argument that what we can observe, and the scientific method requires that we observe it. So to invoke those things as solutions is basically the concept in novel writing, a deus ex machina, a ghost in a machine, which solves the problems magically. And these things are just not answers. They're philosophical mind games, but people do that to avoid reaching the conclusion that there must be a first cause, and the first cause must be supernatural by definition. I think that's really, if we want to look for motives behind it, but the inherent problem is that it takes us out of science in order to try to explain something scientifically, and it can't be done.
Well, other than the supernatural bit, that's what we have in the current rhetoric with Einstein, right? We have this fantasy idea that's been reified into existence in a lot of people's minds, and I'm not having to go at Adam, but some of this stuff is very deep-seated, but you can't get away from it when it's programmed into you through not just the rhetoric of the priests when you're looking at Discovery Channel, but also the sci-fi like Red Dwarf. And if you're British, you'll be fairly familiar with that TV show, maybe not the Americans so much. But yeah, it's based on these Einsteinian concepts that have just been reified into existence from mathematical concepts. And yeah, they're fading out because of things like this. And John mentioned it earlier, you've got Einstein trying to debunk this experiment, scientific validity being given to this, as opposed to field equations and concepts. Any more? Should we move on?
Yeah, I dropped anchor here for a reason. Right? I was expecting a lot more blowback.
Me too.
I said simulation and virtual reality. I was expecting a lot more blowback here. This is what I was talking about for the last presentation. It was probably too long ago. And I said, we're going to stop somewhere, and I'm going to drop anchor somewhere where I didn't spend a whole lot of time with the last time, but I was going to spend some time with this time. I mean, this is simulation virtual reality, right? You can't get around it with this experiment and with thousands of other experiments. Why? There's a couple reasons why here, right? Because photons are inanimate objects, right? They can't be passing information. And where'd they get information from? I mean, information is only caused by intelligent agencies, so there's not any information anywhere. That photons, they're not talking to each other.
Just that's the most important and key detail. Just say that a little bit slower so that the audience recognises the significance of what you've just said.
I'll try to be a little bit calmer.
Okie dokie.
Okay, the second part of the experiment, that is the delayed choice part with D0. There's no way that these photons, which are inanimate objects, by definition, they don't have consciousness, they don't have a mind. They don't communicate with each other. One of them can't tell the future of the other particle. We're way off the reservation here. That points to a virtual reality as opposed to an objective reality. See, those are your two choices here. You got an objective reality, and what's that? Well, an objective reality is an independent existence of things regardless of measurement and observation. As opposed to what a simulation would be, it's without or without independent existence prior to measurement or observation. It's just as simple as that. I hear a lot of people on the internet saying, well, you can't prove that it's a simulation or not a simulation. It's just an open question. No, I just did. So it's just that easy. There's another point that's coming up here that we're going to stop on. I'm not. Yeah, I'll
let's
just
stick
bring
on
it
that
up
one.
right here. Go
Hold
ahead.
on,
Go ahead.
that's the best part of it. So, in terms of what this inanimate stuff is, and this is back to the ontological primitives, does that just exist in and of itself without any interference? Well, no. The information, the knowledge, the knower comes first. That's the critical detail. So no, inanimate stuff doesn't just exist. Everything from nothing, the second ontological primitive. So this is the most critical detail in this whole presentation, for me, personally.
Yeah, we're going to get to another aspect, a small aspect of it, an important one. Well, I'll just wait for that. It's over the next few minutes.
So, in conclusion, in order for matter to exist, there must be a knower first. That's why I've been saying this for 10 years. Now you see the reason why. And atheists, pay attention. From Bernard de Espinal, The Quantum Theory and Reality, in 1979. Great year, by the way. The doctrine that the world is made up of objects whose existence is independent of human consciousness. Well, what is that? Well, that's philosophical naturalism, realism, and atheism. That's what it is. That's what this is. That's the quintessential tenet of it. Turns out to be in conflict with quantum mechanics and with facts established by experiment, right? Who's the science deniers again? Can't hear you. Let me break this down for you. Phlogiston, 13th century alchemy, and Alice in Wonderland are more tenable than your fairy tale scientifically falsified religion. Atheism. Make no mistake, this is a religion. It's belief without evidence, or the lack of belief without evidence, right? It's not only that. In fact, it's belief without evidence in the face of scientifically falsified experiments, right? The evidence scientifically falsifies your position here. That's more than religion. That's blind, fanatical religious zealotry. This is you, right? Take a good look at you. No way around it. Let's pile on. So, from New Scientist, and this paper is dealing with the parent paper from Nature down here. We'll get to here in a moment. In 1967, Simon Cochin and Ernst Specker proved mathematically, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes, that even for a single quantum object where entanglement is not possible, the values that you obtain when you measure its properties depend on the context. So the value of property A, say, depends on whether you chose to measure it with property B or with property C. In other words, there is no reality independent of the choice of measurement, right? That's it. And notice these, right? They kind of stand out. I painted them differently for you. Chose, the choice. What are they talking about here? Free choice, free will. That's what they're talking about, right? The only two doctrines that I know of that speak to free choice as quintessential tenets of their doctrines is quantum mechanics and Christianity. Just saying.
I'll pause it there.
Yeah, there you go. There's the second half of it, right? First, we had inanimate objects, right? But they're not communicating with each other. The second thing, this one stands out to me more. I don't know why. Maybe I can articulate it. There's no way, other than in a virtual reality, that things outside of your skull cap should be or could be influenced by what's inside your skull cap. Is everyone following me? This is all context dependent. It depends on the question that you ask. I don't know how I could break that down any further. It just blows me away that they would say something like this, notwithstanding the free choice and free will. I love that part.
Yeah, you're saying if the information and knowledge of, or the knower itself, comes prior to the matter itself, then ultimately what's, as you phrase it, inside your skull cap can affect what's outside your skull cap. And your quantification of that is to say that that's only physically possible. I carefully phrase my words, in a virtual reality.
Right. That's the antithesis of an objective reality.
Right. Objective reality being as you described it earlier, so the matter itself is in existence without any outside influences, whereas the delayed choice quantum eraser demonstrates otherwise. The knowledge comes first, the information comes first, the knower comes first.
Exactly.
So Betty, do you want to go first?
Nah.
Adam?
I had a back and forth
Over to you,
John
Adam.
about this. We're
Or
talking
Paul.
about inanimate objects, and we come across that tree falling in the woods with a tree. No, that it's that kind of stuff. And
Oh no, ask the question.
John and I
that.
disagree on that.
Ask
so-
it. Go on, ask that question because I like it.
Oh no.
Go on, ask the question.
Will we know that there is my idea is that trees aren't inanimate objects. They are alive and they are sentient, although we cannot communicate with trees, although maybe not yet. Who knows?
Oh, you're way off the
Some people think
reservation.
they are.
That's not the question he
I've
wanted
got to ask an answer now,
Yeah.
haven't I? So
But
if a tree
I
falls
think-
in the woods, does it make a sound? The answer.
Yeah, well, for me, but that's not really the question that I want to ask.
Oh, okay. What's the question you want to ask?
Yeah, because it's more like if nobody in nature is observing, so the animals are out there and there's just the trees and the grass. Would it be there, right? Or is it not there? Is it not real then? That's
Yeah,
more my
you've
question.
sucked all the fun out the answer now, though, haven't you? So I'm going to do it anyway. So if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? The answer being there is no tree.
Yeah.
The answer is number one,
Hmm.
no, it doesn't make it sound. And number two, there is no friggin' tree.
Yeah, well, I disagree because I think that a tree is not an inanimate object and it has sentience. However, we can detect it, or whether we can detect it or not, or can communicate with it or not, it is alive. And I think that nature is still there.
Yeah, no, well, you're absolutely right, and it clinically rips apart the rather fun example. But there we go, Betty. You are absolutely correct. No, you are right though. We can't help the analogy or allegory or whatever it be described as. You know, that question when it gets posed, yeah, it's got its flaws, and you're right to point them out. But ultimately speaking, yeah, the answer is ultimately speaking, well, the tree isn't in existence to begin with, if we consider it an inanimate object, which it's not. So I'll put the disclaimer in for you. You know, the information still comes first. The knower comes first. That's the bottom line. So, Adam, did you want to add something to that?
No, I'm staying out of that onion bag.
Okie dokie. Well, there's only a smaller section. So, Paula, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, when it comes to the virtual reality argument, to me, for most purposes, it really is irrelevant because this is our reality and we're a part of it. We're as virtual as anything else or as real as anything else. And so the argument as whether it's virtual or not, some people will say they must conclude that it's, we're a video game operated by some alien in their basement, but that's just a non sequitur. And the issue is that in our reality is designed. We don't, whether it's virtual or not, is really, we can't ask that question because you have to be outside of the simulation to have simulation have any meaning. So for our purposes, the question doesn't even matter. Now, as far as whether a tree is there, if nobody is, whether a tree makes a sound if it falls and nobody's there to hear it. The thing is that, first of all, on one level, it's a trick question because Sound is a perception of vibration, an interpretation of vibrations. So if nobody's there to interpret it, no, it doesn't make a sound, but yes, it makes a vibration because that's how the laws of physics work. Whether the tree was there or not when nobody looks, well, we can't ever answer the question because nobody's looking. Now, if we apply it as a quantum eraser mind exercise, you could draw a conclusion one way or the other, but in practical life terms that most people are going to deal with, no, if you don't know, you don't know. You don't know if it's not there if you're not looking. It's impossible to know because as soon as you look, you know.
But that
Yeah,
is
but
the
then
answer.
you come to the argument of the brain in a vat kind of.
No. That is the
ideas,
answer.
right?
You said you don't know if it's not there. Well, yes, you do, in the respect that if the information exists at all, if it can be discovered, if it has been experienced, and that is in some way retrievable, then the tree does exist. But if at some point the information is lost to history, say, then no, it doesn't exist anymore. It is as simple as that. Without the information, the tree does not exist.
So the tops of the mountains don't exist because we haven't been there to experience it.
Which mountains? The ones that haven't been rendered yet?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, that's what I think about space, right? By the things that are above the atmosphere, what we can't not perceive. We haven't been there for real. I think we have only been in the upper layers, maybe, of the atmosphere a little bit. So after that, we don't experience it anymore because we haven't collapsed that wave function. Basically, that's something else.
And I
that
just
thought
say
about.
it's kind of a mind exercise, and that's all, because it really, for most people, it's not going to matter as to whether they see design and creation or anything like that.
It's more pure philosophical, I think.
Yeah, it is. It really
it's
is.
fun.
It
fun.
is.
Yeah.
But
I got another.
Anyway.
I have another monkey wrench to throw at you.
Okay.
I threw it the last time we were here. Remember, I said, okay, let's say there's a forest there, and somebody has knowledge of a forest there. So there's information existing that the forest is there, right? Now that person leaves. Does that forest have to be rendered?
Does that what? I didn't get what you're saying. Force.
Forest.
Forest.
Oh,
I didn't
forest.
say force. No, forest. Plenty of trees.
Forest. My bad.
Yeah, it's the American accent, I think.
Well,
yeah.
No, I would say no. So no, unless they had some sort of documentation of it, or their existence would keep that forest in existence, because at some point they could, they have experienced it, and they in themselves are that knower, so they have experienced, therefore that forest still exists. But if that person died and had no interaction in the interim stages, then no, I would say it didn't. Am I correct?
No, what I'm saying, yeah, you're correct. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the person's still alive. He exists. He went to the forest. He's the only one that knows it, but he's still alive. And the forest is there, but he leaves. Does that have to be rendered after he leaves?
Yes, I would say yes.
All right, scientific evidence? No, I'm just messing with you, man. Let's move on.
Well, hold on. Am I wrong?
It doesn't have to be rendered.
It doesn't.
See, I would say this is where you step outside the understanding of, and you require the knowledge of the programmer. It's impossible with the tools we have, i.e., these dimensions, to define whether or not, because you can't be there and not be there, and that's why additional dimensions, which is where the program is written, would be the only place you would find that knowledge. In that, whether or what, from a computer point of view, I suppose, whether or not it'd be more efficient to keep that rendering running for future observations so that it is relevant to reality and fits the paradigm, or whether or not you can shut it down and restart it because it is based on a base program. It gets a bit deep again, but for me, those things aren't attainable. They're just hypothetical, but you can theorize their function in other.
If I could just jump in quick, the problematic phrase for me is have to be rendered. Nobody says anything has to be rendered. It's kind of an assumption in itself, whether something can only be rendered if there's a need, you know. But basically, if we can tie this to the flat Earth debate, which people have been asking for a while in the chat, I mean, everything can't be directly tied to that, but we're talking about what's possible as opposed to what is. And that's the whole problem with people when they say there's a standard model. They will say, well, it's possible, even though we disagree that it is, but they'll say it's possible. And that still doesn't mean it is. And I think that's the essential question of all this is possibilities don't mean anything unless you all recognize that all anyone has are probabilities. And then this decision is up to each individual what level of probability they're happy with.
Right,
But
well put.
in the end, that's the question.
Well put. This is what we started on or covered in the last show. I forget. I'll lose track of time. But yeah, the probability distribution. So yes, that's why I said in a kind of condescending tone to Adam earlier. Well, anything's possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't even brought this up.
This is great.
The whole reason why I did is I'm not a video game player, but I'm thinking of virtual reality and virtual games. Is that when the person is playing a game, right? It has a lot of other venues stored in the computer, but they're not rendered, right? Even though that they're there, and the player knows that they're there, and he can pull them up at will. They're not rendered for him because they don't need to be.
Yeah. So the point I was making there, John, though, is if you think of it in terms of a computer game and one of those forests that you plant at time 0, it is going to be a resource. And when you plant little seeds, there's 0 resource there. So within the computer program, does it still render the growth of the forest and the actions of the forest and the interactions of the forest? Or does it just simulate from 0 the next point? So is there a re-rendering every time, or does it just the rendering continue? So once a knower has been there, does it exist forever? Do you get me? Or does it shut down again, I suppose, and then is re-rendered?
Like in Star Trek on the hologram.
Well, yeah, I suppose. But
like
even there, does that, when the hologram, the visual image shuts down, which would be the observer per se, does the actual life of the forest continue so that when it re-renders at whatever time in the future, it's relative to the time and the change that would have be observed?
Yes, it has to. If that original knower knew the information, it has to follow the laws of physics. It has to be consistent, right?
Hold on.
So therefore, if that one forest has only ever been discovered by one person, that person then dies, does the forest renew?
Oh, no, that's a whole nother question. We're going to get to that at the end of this presentation. You're going to see it.
Okay. Is there anything more then? Because if not, I'll move on with the presentation because this is the last section of it. Any more?
Yeah, maybe it will come afterwards. Maybe I can bring it up then again.
Okay.
What I wanted to say. Yeah. Go on.
So, this was in 1967. They proved it mathematically, right? Then, in 2011, LabQuick's experimental non-classicality of an indivisible quantum system from Nature. The authors showed that unlike what one would expect if reality were independent of mind, realism, that's philosophical naturalism or atheism, the properties of a quantum system do not exist prior to measurement via validating the Cauchy-Specker theorem. Renowned quantum physicist, here he is again, Anton Zellinger, in a related New Scientist article dated June 2011, suitably titled "Quantum Magic Shows Reality is What You Make It," is quoted as saying that there is no sense in assuming what we do not measure about a system has an independent reality. Conclusion: no knower, no matter existing. Again, there is no sense in assuming that what we do not measure about a system has an independent reality, Zellinger concludes. Cauchy now at Princeton University in New Jersey, is also happy. Almost half a century after Specker and I proved our theorem, which was based on a thought experiment, real experiments now, it's very important, confirm our results. See, before the real experiments, all you had was a fairy tale. That's it. But real experiments now confirm our result. Steinberg, quantum physicist, is impressed. This is a beautiful experiment. If previous experiments testing entanglement shut the door on hidden variable theories, the latest work seals it tight. It appears that you can't even conceive of a theory. You can't even conceive of one. You can't even imagine one, let alone actualize it, where specific observables would have definite values that are independent of the other things that you measure. It's over. Conclusion, no knowery, no mattery. So let's wind it up. I don't think that people actually appreciate the delayed choice quantum eraser, so I'm going to break it down into a simple double slit example. Right? So let's get this right. Let's pull this up. There we go. So let's say you just got promoted to physicist of the world. University has given you your own lab. So, and again, let's say get rid of all these lines and stuff. You're going to virginize this experiment. You decide that, hey, you've listened to this quantum mechanics junk for, many years. So you decide, hey, I'm going to do the experiments myself. I want to see this. I'm going to confirm this myself. So what you do is you set the experiment up. You put slit detectors. You want to be comprehensive, so you put slit detectors here, slit detector here, right? You're going to route this path information over to a computer here, all right? And then you're going to run this experiment. You run this experiment 499 times, right? Every single time you run this experiment, the wave function collapses. That is, there are two bars or two patterns behind each of these slits every single time, 499 times, right? So you're tired, time to go on vacation, Jamaica mom. So, but you have one experiment left to run. Well, you say, oh, the heck with it. I'll run the experiment while I'm gone. It ain't going to make any difference, right? So you clean up this experiment, put a new photographic plate over here. Now, instead of routing the information from these slits to this computer here, you're going to route the information, the slit information, over to the administrative building, over to your computer over here, right? So what you do is you turn this experiment on. You don't look back. You don't look at the experiment. You flick the switch. You turn this experiment on. No looking back. You close the door and you lock it. Now, you have the only key to the lab. The custodians, janitors, they don't have the key. You are the only one with the key. No one can enter this room, right? And over here in the administrative building, no one can enter your room. Your office is closed. That's it. It's going to stay dirty. And you're going to Jamaica for 3 weeks. So after 2 weeks, the experiment, runs its course. Either the light source burns out or you have it on the timer or whatever. It burns out, it's done, right? So you stay another week in Jamaica and it's time to come home. So you get on the plane. During the plane flight, your secretary calls you and says, hey, the building's on fire, the administrative building. So you get off the plane. You run on over to the administrative building. The building's total. It's done. All your path information that came from this experiment is destroyed. It's irretrievable. It existed. Now it doesn't exist. No one looked at it, right? It's gone. You're bummed out that the building burned down, but you say, hey, well, the glass is half full. I still have my lab. It's good to go, right? And you already know what's going to happen over here, right? Because you did this experiment 499 times. Every single time you got wave function collapse, right? You got two columns behind here. So you head on over to the lab. You walk into the lab, you open up the door, you look at this detector, and guess what you see? That's what you see. Interference, baby. Right? I'm telling you, that's what he's seeing. That's what that quantum eraser experiment was telling you. Now, we're off the edge of the map here. Out here, there be monsters. There's a new sheriff in town, and his name's a delayed choice quantum eraser. Y'all be cool. Right on. Thanks for your ear. Have a nice day.
Absolutely superb. Really, really good presentation. Is there anything else you need to add? I don't think there is anything you need to add, but I've always got to ask, of course. That's the way of these things.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe with this one, to add something, I don't know what I could add to it. This is jaw-dropping right here, right? Now listen, let's try another scenario, right? You have the path information existing over here, right? But the custodian can come in here, into the lab. If a custodian comes into this lab and he looks at this detector with the path information existing, no one knows it yet, right? But it's existing in this reality. If he walks in to this experiment, he's getting wave function collapse here. That's it, right? He's getting wave function collapse. That's it. It's over, right? There's nothing to convert it back. Once he sees it and he knows that there's two columns here, it doesn't matter what happens to this path information. It can burn, it can get destroyed. It doesn't matter. It's already done. Nature folded it. It didn't fold its card. It had lay its cards on the table, and that's it. It's irreversible or irreconcilable. It's two columns.
Yeah, likewise, although you didn't say this when you gave the example, but it's sort of assumed that if it didn't burn down, the same thing.
Right. I think we talked about another example. What was it on the? Oh yeah, it was the beach, right? So another good example. Nathan and I, we go to the beach. Now we're the first people ever to go to this beach. No one has ever been there before, and we both look out and we see an island. Right there is an island out there, and like I don't know, 5 miles off the beach, we see the island. Both of us see it. It's there. However, we leave the beach and we get in a car accident and we die. Now, no information is existing in this reality that island exists, right? So let's say Sally, she decides to come down a couple hours later. She's on the beach and she looks out. That island doesn't have to be there. It doesn't. It's a probability distribution. It's just a draw. You take a draw from nature. It's off that interference pattern, right? Remember I said about the probability distributions, right? I know it's out of this world, but that's the way our reality is.
That's you need to know it. It also answers the age-old question: which came first, chicken or egg?
Right. The
chicken.
Emphatically.
So, very interesting questions that get answered with the things like the quantum eraser. I think I might round it out there, John. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much indeed for going through that presentation with us. It really was exceptional, as always.
It was my pleasure, sir.
Okay, so that's the end of the actual quantum eraser experiment explanation. Now, the phone lines are open, so to speak, so there is a couple of people in Discord already. We'll just discuss that last section, and then the link is in the info box below this live stream. So obviously, if we're not live or you're watching this on the re-up on Nathan Oakley, then you can't join, but for the now, right now, if you're watching on Nathan Oakley 1980, there is a link to join Discord, so feel free. But we'll start with Paula. Any comments?
Sorry, I was typing to two different people.
Maybe we'll come to you last. So, Adam, if we can.
Yes,
start.
please.
I was kind of hoping.
Come on, spit it out.
I don't really have any great beef with it, John. Do you know what I mean? It's understanding. The only thing I'd say before you open it up in terms of summary, this is good stuff to me for learning. But the thing that taught me that this system we're in is encoded and has a creator was, as some, I don't know, it was Paula or Betty alluded to earlier, which was DNA, and that was the thing. This is kind of secondary proof to me that more fundamentally, not just the physical matter is encoded, but the very fabric. And I don't know what, maybe you guys have got a clearer definition on the implications, but for me, it just continues that it is, as I alleged to earlier, probably something you, from a metaphysical point of view, you need to step out of to fully comprehend. I'm happy not to be able to comprehend, but can see the implications of the experiments and what they do demonstrate or imply. And I think there's a slight difference in the conclusions. I think both me and Nathan are probably a little more reticent to make as big a statement as you guys, but the implications of this being a created system, I think, are quite clear.
Yeah, the key is information, not only in quantum mechanics, but you're talking about information in DNA. So it's all boils down, the ontological basement of this reality is information. All the actual sciences now are information sciences, because that's what it boils down to. And there's no problem, like you said before, and like I said before, about DNA and the biochemistry and all that information packed in there. Those are great arguments, but you need chemistry for that, right? You need atoms and molecules. This just takes it one step back and said, where'd you get the atoms and molecules at? In other words, where'd you get the dirt? So that's why I enjoy it. It just puts an exclamation point on the whole enterprise. But you're right about DNA. In fact, that's my first proof.
Betty?
Yeah, speaking about DNA, I mean, in previous times we didn't know what the cell was all about and what was in there, so we never observed it, right? So we never knew, but it still was there, right? Or was it just there when we discovered it? I mean, yeah, it's basically like that tree falling in the forest kind of thing. If you zoom into the cell, and we didn't even know what was in the cell, but still these things were in there working for us. So I think the whole analogy doesn't add up in the entirety, but I think for me, the quantum mechanics thing, the main thing is the time and space doesn't exist, and the free will part. That what is most significant for me, and proves for me that there is a God and intelligent design there. So what do you think, John, about that cell being not observed in previous times, but still you have all these things going on in there?
I was
so
just
weren't they there
pick
then?
up on that one, but that's got my ear, that one, because I suppose it relates to when you say knowledge, the ultimate definition of what you're saying. Are you saying understanding, because that would require magnification, or are you, because surely if you observed the cell, the information there is there, whether or not the eye magnifies it, the information's been transmitted? Or are you saying it's only been transmitted in a lower resolution, so it is just, the cell is just a blob of jelly at that point?
Well, the thing is, like the example of being on the beach and seeing an island, going away and dying basically, and not knowing. Someone else could go to the beach and not see an island, right? So you can go also inside, and inside the cell. We have never experienced the inside of a cell before. Wasn't it there then? I mean, we didn't know the which path information of all this, but this was in the cell basically. So we could think of that as well, right?
Let's hear what John says. I'm on bated breath for this as well, so that makes three of us.
your bated breath for the answer for this question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the information in the cell is life, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to observe it. Number one, this observer effect or this observation thing, I think it's been blown out of proportion because you actually don't need to observe anything to collapse the wave function.
Okay. So what you're saying is it is the information, therefore it's kind of a redundant question.
It sort of is in a way. It's a great question. I love that question. Let me think about that.
The question for me then is until you bother to get a HD screen to look at the image, does the output only render in 360? Because that's what you get, mate.
No, I think with this, the information is at a fundamental level what makes the life anyway. So it's part of the information structure. But,
there you go. You got it.
So in that respect, it is redundant. But it's a good question because it got me thinking, hang on, do we zoom down and suddenly discover part of life by observing it? But yeah, you're right. I even qualified it myself earlier on in the show. So it's the information, the existence of the information. And how do you have information existence? Well, you can't measure it. You can't weigh it. How do you have it then? Well, you have a knower.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Still, I think that's the thing, and it goes also for nature and these trees that aren't inanimate objects.
Oh, I see it now. She was greasing the skids. Nice. Touche.
Yeah. So that's basically what I'm saying, and I think it's more on a but how can I say, spiritual level that I take this information of the quantum eraser thing, because I think that thoughts, intent, is doing it also, and time and space doesn't exist, but still you have free choice within. So it's difficult to explain for me what I'm thinking about that, but this is a significant experiment. Either way, but I don't think that the simulation with the tree falling in the forest making a sound or whatever, I think that that's part of it, because also God is in the observer. And wait a minute, John. Wait a minute.
I'm gonna tell you, don't give the game away here. That. I'm going to tell you right now. You're going down a path.
I know.
You shouldn't have gave the game away.
That I want to tell you.
Okay, go ahead and finish, and I'll round up.
Okay.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Hold on. Go ahead and finish. Then Paula. Then we'll open up the phone line, so to speak.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, you subscribe to the Bible, John. You do?
Pretty sure John's a Buddhist.
Is that a legitimate question?
Genesis 1. So in Genesis 1, God says that he made the grass and the trees first. And then he created man. So if I go by that, then trees have sentience and are collapsing the wave function. And there is a nature with grass and trees already there for us. And then we are being placed in that garden. So that's what I think, that if you go out in nature, the forest is still there, and you can still come back to the same forest. It will have changed because the forest lives and does its thing. That's my take on it.
Fair enough. Paula?
Yeah, I would just invoke one biblical statement that God makes it rain where no one lives. And so I don't subscribe to the rendering idea is the thing. There's so much evidence for a creator, it's not going to hurt it one way or another. But it, like you said, John, it does put an exclamation point on it. But I think sometimes we stretch it too far when we say that certain things don't exist unless someone knows about it, because God is bigger than that. And God is absolutely the first cause. There must be a first cause. And because that's not threatened by any conclusion on the quantum eraser experiment, I don't see any problem with rejecting the idea that things don't exist unless they're rendered, as if it is a video game where you have to be efficient with your memory usage and you don't render things that are not being on screen at the moment. I don't think that's a valid analogy in all respects. But here we're talking about the nature of our nature, and all we can conclude is that nature itself cannot exist without a supernatural knower. And I think that's really the important thing to agree on.
Yeah. The other stuff was ancillary, and I was just taking some artistic license, trying to logically follow it out. So, but that wasn't the point. The point was that matter doesn't exist without information. That was my point.
Right, and we all agree on that too.
Indeed. Okay. Well, there is actually a couple of people in the Discord server, so we may actually have some questions from the public. We shall see. So let's see how this works. So Betty, are you in the Discord server currently? I've got it up on screen so the audience can see who's in there, but if you want to pick a random person and see if we can take a question from them.
Yes, I'm in there.
I got a question.
Unmuted one.
Okay, what's your name? Or do you want to go?
Hey, my name is Freddie. What's up? What's up, Nathan?
Good to have you. Go ahead. What's your question?
No, I have a question for John. I'm curious. So he believes that Jesus is the first knower, right?
Sounds like this is going to involve a bit of back and forth, John. Go ahead if you want to.
Yeah, this is good. This is going down a lane here. What I'm saying is all I'm arguing for today, right now, is a creator. Jesus is a, yes, I don't believe that. I know that. However, that's a different subject.
Okay.
So did you have
follow
anything
me?
specific to the double
No,
slit
I'm sorry.
quantum?
I'm sorry. I don't mean to go off topic. For me personally, I'm just curious because we're talking about, what the first knower, right, or God, basically, right? Whatever was the first being to collapse the wave function, right? Or the first knower to collapse the wave function, rather, right?
Yeah. Well,
So,
I think for Christians it is Jesus, right?
Well, hold on. Let me just get some clarity to the. Within context, no, I would say no. The context to your question is to say that the creator itself, which is creating these parameters, would be the first wave function collapse, whereas I'd see that as a parameter of the system that we live in. So we are confined by that. But you're kind of automatically tying it down to something which is beyond that, whether or not, John will immediately concede that, I don't know, but it seems like you're constraining it to having to work within the system that we're finding out about by way of this experiment. Does that make sense?
Not really. I don't know. I'm just curious. That's all.
Well, let me give you an example. If I boil it down to a game that you are creating, and you decide in that game that the characters can fly, and you set certain parameters for that flight, and that's akin to wave function collapse, just for really crude analogy. Well, you as the designer of that system of flight are not applicable to the first flight. You are outside of that construction.
Right. So the being that's outside of that construction is basically God, right? The creator of the simulation, or the wave function collapser, if you will.
Well, in that regard, we have differing opinions on the panel. My opinion is very different to other people's, but feel free to field your question, and if it's to someone specific, say their name, and hopefully they'll give you an answer.
Yeah. No, my question is to John, because if I'm not mistaken, I think he's, a Christian, fundamentalist Christian. So I think he thinks that the first knower, or he believes, or he knows, like you just said, that it's Jesus Christ is the first knower, right? And I just wanted to ask him, yeah, I want to ask him. That's what he thinks, right? I just want to confirm that real quick, and then I have one more question because I want to know. All right, so I'm going to skip over.
Yes.
I know
The
John's
answer
a
to that
Christian, so
question
he's
is
going to say
yes.
yes. Of course, Jesus is the first, knower or first,
Okay, he's
collapser
given
of
you
the
an
wave
answer.
function.
He has
So
given you
my
an answer.
question
So
is,
he's replied in the
I'm sorry.
affirmative. So just so you know, he has replied in the affirmative and said yes. But if you want to go on to the next question, then marvelous.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it. No, I have the next question. My question is, so if Jesus is the first knower, right? He first collapsed the wave function, and now we have the ability of a knower, right? We collapse the wave function now, right? Human beings do. So doesn't that mean that we are connected to God, or I don't want to say that we are God, which that's what I mean, but isn't God manifesting through all of us because we are all now the knowers?
Excellent question.
It's an outstanding question. I thought you were going to go on another route, and I was smiling here, just waiting, because I've been waiting for this question. Not your question. You didn't ask it. You didn't get a gold star, but it's a great question. I've been waiting for another question in this genre that hasn't been asked. But to answer your question, yes. To answer your question, yes. Without him, without his consciousness, we would have no consciousness. Correct.
So God is all of us then, right? Because we're all knowers.
No.
Like God?
No, we're not gods. No, he is separate from us. But without his consciousness, there would be no consciousness, in other words.
But how is God separate if we're all knowers, I'm confused. God is a knower,
all knowers.
right? He collapsed.
Well, there's a difference. Okay.
And now we are all knowers. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we're all knowers in that respect, but we don't know everything. God does. So we're knowers like he is to a limited extent. See, and we can only participate in the game. We can't control the exact outcomes because it's a probability distribution, right? We're just participating. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Did that answer your question?
Not really. I'm okay. I know what you're saying. God is all knowing. We are not all knowing. I get it, but I'm just, as far as being a knower, collapsing the wave function of, God collapses the wave function and things turn into matter, right? So if we do the same thing, aren't we doing the same thing as God? Not that we're God all knowing or whatever, but aren't we God in the sense that we have the ability to create reality in the form of the wave collapse, like the Bible says? I know a lot of people like to say it's metaphoric. It says "ye are gods" a couple of times in the Bible, and people don't like to hear that, but it says that. And not that I am God and I'm all knowing, but God is manifesting through me and you and all of us. That's why we are knowers, exactly like God. And we're collapsing the wave function exactly like God did.
Okay.
In the first,
Yeah, but that's the thing.
instance.
Like, can I have this one?
Now we're doing
Sure.
the same.
Go ahead,
Go
Betty.
ahead.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the thing is that God said that he made us in his image, basically. So we are an image of God. So we have also a capability of creation, of co-creation, I would say, but
We do,
within
right?
the limits that he gave us. So that's basically how I see it.
So if it's good by
And
you,
that means that if you subscribe to God, because we have free will, there's a time and a space to do that in, and that's how I see the quantum eraser also, with a little bit of the delay, right? God knows instantly, so he's omnipresent and all this omniscience stuff that's going on with God, and we have a time that it has to take place in, and that's how I see the quantum eraser thing. And so we have a little bit of that same thing, but not all of it. So we are part of the whole, basically.
Okay. don't know if you want to hopefully open the mic on another guest, and we'll see if there's any other questions from the Discord panel that want to be asked. Thank you very much for your question, the last person. I didn't actually catch your name, but some excellent questions. Thank you very much. Who's next?
Hello, hello, can you hear me?
Somebody who's very quiet.
Sorry, I'm trying. My mic's not really
Is that
doing well.
Toppy? Is that Toppy here? No. Flatzoid FE, is that you?
Is it correct?
I'll see if I can raise your level.
Hello?
Your absolute maximum. I'll get you up as high as I
Sorry.
can, and then give me a second to get you as loud as I possibly can. Okay, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I just want to point out, mate. I was thinking, if let's say it's in a game with if something's created and you're not there anymore, it would really have memory that it's been there. So even if you're gone, don't you think it would still exist anyway?
I didn't fully understand the question. Can you say it once more?
I didn't catch it.
Can you repeat the question?
Am I making this?
You're clear now. We can hear you.
Because you guys said, okay. With it, it's the same with the tree, where you said the tree wasn't really there unless you observed it. So what I'm saying is, what if it was observed, you walked away, and it should be there because it already had information that it was there before. So even if the other person hasn't been there before, wouldn't it be right to say that they did? It would be there if someone else comes back there because it had information that it's been there before. If I'm
Right.
making
I
sense.
got his question now. I got it. Yes. As soon as the wave functions collapse, as soon as there's knowledge of the witch path information, somebody recognizes that tree, then there's 100% probability that that tree is going to be there when another person comes and looks at it. It's got to stay consistent. Consistent histories. Everything's got to be consistent. It can't break any laws. Like you can't come back. The first person sees a tree there. You can't come back and see a moon there, right? It's got to be consistent. Everything's got to follow as in consistent histories. Yeah, good question.
Cool. I don't know if there's. I think there was 3 people on the Discord panel, Betty. I don't know if you want to open the mic on someone else, and we'll get another question. Another good question. Thank you very, very much indeed. I'll reset the volume on it before I open the mics. Have we got another guest that wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, it's Red Man.
Again, I'll see if I can just get you a bit louder.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to ask your question?
Loud enough?
Yeah, you're good.
No, I'm okay. I'm just saying y'all do a great job. I watch y'all shows every day as much as possible. I had to go back and watch the rest of your shows. I just want to say y'all doing a good job.
Thank you very much.
Especially with the gas pressure.
Right.
That killed me.
Fake space.
And
before we go off the reservation,
no.
Did you have a specific question regards the double-slit quantum eraser or knowledge of the witch path or anything along those lines?
No, I don't have any questions on that. I appreciate it. Good job. It just killed me when you say gas pressure without a container. It kills me. Good job.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Okay, I mean.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I've been fighting with this for the last 4 months, and I ain't gonna keep y'all on long. But I got thinking about it. When I heard it, I said, "Holy shit!" Oh, sorry about that. Holy moly, there's something going wrong here.
You are actually allowed to swear. I don't mind. It's the swearing rule. Let's not go off on a tangent. There's more guests in there. Is there one more guest in there, Betty, that hasn't actually asked a question yet? If so, if you'd like to unmute them.
Then go ahead.
Yes.
I got you.
Hello?
I'd love to ask a question.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead. Or maybe not.
He was roboting.
Can you hear me?
When he said that.
Yes, we do.
Cool. So I've been debating with a professional surfer for 7 months now. He's very well known. You've probably heard of him debating some other guys. But he has a well, let's start with my brother. My brother's in the Coast Guard, and he says there's no way that the Earth could be flat because when we are have a ship over here and another one over there, the curve of the ocean is what stops the radio signals. Have you guys heard of that one before?
Sure, it's always Earth cover obstruction. It's the only cause they can assert, but yeah, go ahead.
So is that true? I mean, I'm a flat earther, but he says, no. He's like, the reason I know it's all baloney is because we lose signal, and it's because of the curve of the Earth, because of the ocean. So I said, that's funny, because from LA to Hawaii is a 710-mile hump of water, but we can still make radio signals between that. But his argument is, well, no, if you go to Asia and you go across, more water, you definitely lose signals. So his argument definitely doesn't make sense, but he's so sold on it. I don't know why. I don't know. I guess these people, I'm really experiencing this, hearing this cognitive dissonance. And another thing I wanted to add is everybody's screwed now if they're trying to look up flat Earth on Google or YouTube, because everything now, the first top 20, 30 videos are all, why flat Earth is stupid, National Geographic, Science this, NASA. So whenever I start talking to people about flat Earth, it's hard for me to say, oh, research flat Earth, because it's like the first thing they're going to see is why flat Earth is so stupid. So I feel like I kind of got grandfathered into the subscribing to you and a few other teachers. Just wanted to throw that out there. So if anybody's listening, you're in the right place for sure. It's one of the last channels that you can, it's like a related search channel.
Yeah, we're well aware of the censorship, but is there any, obviously no more questions related to the double-slit quantum eraser. Is there anybody else on the panel that wants to add anything to the double-slit, or is this being rounded out for a bit of a flat Earth chit-chat? Because if so, we might do it in an after show, so that this actual section remains about the double-slit quantum eraser. As much as I do want to discuss flat Earth, it'll end up being an after show if that's what this descends into. So I'll ask the rest of the panel, as much as I do want to answer all of your questions, and they will be. We'll chat a bit more to the Discord server, perhaps in the after show, unless, Betty, there's someone else that's joined that might want to ask us a question specifically on topic.
Not yet. I think that we had everybody here asking questions. I can go through them again. Maybe have to. Sorry, I hear myself in an echo.
Yeah, if you want to ask the panel once more, one at a time, if they had any further questions, I don't think so. I don't think it's necessary, to be honest. I mean, we will come back to the Discord server, but I think in the meantime we'll basically see. Well, that's probably where we round out the questions from them.
I see someone new in here.
Oh, okay. A late arrival.
Oh, he's gone.
Okay.
Hey Nathan, before you close out, or are you going to close out?
My intention at this moment is to, if there's no further actual on-topic conversation regarding the double-slit quantum eraser, knowledge of the witch path, that sort of stuff, then I will round out the live show so that this is self-contained on-topic for Ballbusters and about the double-slit quantum eraser, as opposed to a random flat Earth bit tagged onto the end. It is directly related, and I wanted to, I don't know, Paula, hopefully you'll maybe perk up at the end of this, because you questioned the chat because some alluded to the idea that this is not directly linked to flat Earth, and it is. We're talking about the nature of reality, absolutely on topic, and the start of that road is to simply question the mainstream narrative of reality itself, which is a nihilistic end to the starting point of these ontological primitives. Everything from nothing is the mainstream narrative. This is the bread and butter of the heliocentric system, and that is the world we are sold, with that ontological primitive being answered for us in the form of the Big Bang. Now, what we're talking about in reality, and it's being directly addressed by the quantum eraser experiment, is the antithesis of the mainstream narrative. Now, that revolves around, and I pick my words carefully, the heliocentric model. And as I say, it has only one adherence to that ontological primitive, that everything did indeed exist without any knower or observer or anything of that sort. It just all puffed into existence from nothing. Well, this is utter codswallop when you appreciate the significance of the double-slit quantum eraser. So again, I'm going to go through the whole Ballbusters panel, see if there's anybody else that wants to add anything to this specific topic, and if not, we'll round out the live show, and I'll ask people to hang around if they're watching on the second channel, Nathan Oakley, because we'll chat flat Earth probably with the Discord server.
Yeah, one just small admin thing. I remembered that somebody asked a question about spontaneous parametric down conversion. I don't know if Betty's still in the Skype message board in here, but
Yeah,
I
I'm here.
Okay, hey, listen, can you, whoever asked that question, I hope they're still listening, and I hope that it can go into Discord. Can you copy and paste the links that I posted in Skype into Discord for me, please?
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so Paula, did you have any sort of closing remarks?
Yeah, I guess. Sorry about I'm chewing. You caught me eating a bite of food, but
That's okay. It's
I
been a
knew
long
that would
show.
happen. I wait. But anyway, yeah, the phrase "nothing is knowable," which is a philosophical idea of, has been mentioned before, solipsism, where everyone claims that it's actually arrogant to say you know anything or that you've found truth, and instead of just endlessly seeking it, because they think everyone has their own truth. But this experiment is just one of the many reasons why that's nonsense, because things have to be known. And so when someone says you have your own truth, that is in direct denial of every measurable experiment or test that we might do of our reality, of our what is real to us, whether it's ultimately real from God's perspective or not. You know what I'm saying about simulation. But the point is that things are knowable. And as I've said many times on my channel, there's no point in seeking truth if you're not allowed to find it. And so each of us can have a personal conviction about the conclusion we draw from evidence. But in the end, if we're at all rational and honest with ourselves, there's no point in talking about things or trying to do an experiment or seeking truth if it cannot be found. And I think if anything else, this tells us that on the flat earth debate is that not only is the idea possible of a creator, that it must be necessary. And that's why I have such issues and so short-tempered with people who will say, no, you're not allowed to know that there's a creator. You're not allowed to know anything about the creator. And I'm thinking, why not, first of all? And I've got science and you don't, second of all. And logic, all those things together. Yes, logic is more philosophical. It's a decided upon, agreed upon, correct method of thinking. But in the end, it's the most consistent method, and I don't think anyone can come up with something better than that there's a creator.
Excellent. Adam?
I think it's been put quite eloquently. The only thing I'd say really is to add to that, and it was mentioned on the flat earth argument. I think tonight's debate has no direct relevance on whether you believe it's flat or a ball. It was totally independent of that and quite refreshing as well, if you know what I mean. So it's much bigger implications for me than the shape of it. It's the fact that it's confirming that it's not a random accident. And whether you believe in one particular doctrine or another, it again, kind of irrelevant. The scientific evidence is that you have to accept that it is created.
Betty?
Yeah, I think that I said a lot already about these things, and what Paula said is really true. There is an absolute truth, and there's an absolute authority, and that's the creator. He designed the laws of logic, the nature, the laws of love, everything that is really necessary for us to lead our lives. And but just get the choice to either see it or not see it, and that's how I see it. And I hope that people will come to the truth, because there is an absolute truth. And if you say that there isn't, then is that statement true? I mean, that collapses your whole argument. So that's what I want to say.
Self-contradictory. Yeah.
Exactly.
Nothing is knowable as a claim to know.
Exactly. Yeah. So you implode your own argument basically with that. So
Right.
that's and I think when I first came across the quantum erasure or the quantum mechanics part was the double slit, and that told me a whole lot already. I was already convinced with Schrödinger cat, the cat in the box with a vial of poison basically, and that did a lot of things for me. And I hope that more people will look into this and give it a chance. And from the part of the flat Earth, but what's the significance from that? I think that the time and space part being not a real thing is for me imploding Einstein's theory. So that's why we can't have these spheres in the universe, right? So that implodes that argument. So I think that quantum mechanics can be proving or helping to disprove the globe. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Excellent. Shout out to Del West Watson for the super chat. Thank you very much indeed. John, if you can go on to the super chat. Ciao Yun Cat. Thank you very much for the super chat also. So John, if you can give us your closing remarks, then I'll ask the people in Nathan Oakley to stay tuned and say goodbye to the people in Nathan Oakley 1980.
Yeah, information is the ontological primitive, right? It's the basement of all reality. That's what a lot of people say, but they remove the one step for information, the necessity. Got to have a knower to have information exist. Period. End of story. He is the ontological primitive. It's the only one left standing. Thank you.
And with that, I will say a huge, massive, enormous thank you to Betty Van Velsen, Adam Meakin, and Paula, otherwise known as Bible Literalist, for joining and obviously making this BALLBUSTERS possible. And if you're watching this, as I say, on Nathan Oakley channel, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Hopefully we'll have a chat with the Discord server. But if you're watching this live on Nathan Oakley 1980, unfortunately this is where we bid you farewell. A massive, huge, enormous thank you to all who tuned in. Smash the super chat, like, comment. Hopefully you'll share the show wide and far. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.